The main news of the night sounds alarming and tense. On the night of August 25th, a new attack by unmanned aerial vehicles broke out in the skies over Ukraine. According to reports from the Ukrainian side, more than 100 attack drones took to the air. Their route was calculated in advance and directed at military facilities, warehouses, and supply centers deep within the defensive lines. The first strikes hit Sumy and Shostka, and then a series of flashes lit up the sky over the Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, and Chernihiv regions. The history of this operation began long before the first drone engines roared into the air. Preparations for the strike are always shrouded in secrecy. For weeks, intelligence networks recorded the movement of equipment, the composition of echelons, and the nature of cargo movements. Each report was woven into the overall picture, where even the smallest detail mattered. Information about the distribution of reserves, the conversion of buildings into warehouses and headquarters, and the routes for delivering fuel and ammunition became threads in a complex network that gradually took shape as a plan. The work in the operational headquarters was comparable to a chess game, in which each move was calculated several steps ahead. Analysts collected satellite images and compared them with intelligence reports and radio intercepts. Every suspicious cluster of trucks, every site with camouflage netting became a potential target. The task was not to strike at random, but to pinpoint locations where the presence of equipment and personnel was confirmed by several sources. Subscribe so you don't miss new content and can see the full picture of what is happening. Particular attention was paid to the Sumy region. This is where the railway junctions were located, which had been used for months to transfer reserves. According to intelligence reports, the Sumy and Shostka stations, as well as the surrounding industrial areas, were used as transshipment points. Over the past few weeks, trains carrying equipment and fuel have been converging here. Such a concentration inevitably turned the region into a priority target. In the Chernihiv region, sources reported increased activity in the area of the city of Mena and near Novorod-Siversky. Troop movements, increased radio communications, and the operation of air defense systems were recorded here. All this indicated that the Ukrainian side was expecting attacks and was seeking to cover important targets. But despite all the defensive measures, it is impossible to completely cover the sky. In the Kharkiv region, attention was drawn to warehouses in the vicinity of Kharkiv and Veliki Burluk. These areas have long been part of the logistics system supplying troops in the eastern direction. The presence of camouflage structures and increased patrolling confirmed the strategic importance of the facilities. At the same time, observations of the Dnipropetrovsk region continued. Particular attention was paid to the Mezhova area, where satellite images revealed new sites for unloading trucks. According to the data, a large supply point was being created here, from where cargo was to be distributed further to the front line. The information gathered formed a picture of the upcoming operation. The headquarters developed a plan in stages. First, the routes of the drones were specified, taking into account the location of Ukrainian air defense systems. Then, intermediate points were calculated where the drones were to imitate false targets, distracting attention and expending the defenders' missiles and shells. At the same time, the possibility of regrouping routes in case of obstacles was taken into account. The whole idea was based on the concept of massive pressure. The use of a large number of drones was supposed to overload the defense systems. When dozens of marks appear on radar screens, it is difficult for operators to determine which ones are real threats. A mistake in even a few cases gives the strike aircraft a chance to get through and reach their targets. The preparations were not limited to technical calculations. An important element was cooperation with intelligence groups inside Ukraine. These sources were prepared in advance for the night of the attack. Their task was to confirm the presence of the target at the right moment and record the consequences. To do this, they used hidden observation posts that took photos and videos and sent signals through closed communication channels. This way, the commanders could check the real data against what they got from satellite intelligence and electronic surveillance. When the plan was finally verified, the day of the operation arrived. The night was chosen for a reason. The dark sky provided cover, and the sound of the drone's engines was lost in the nighttime noise familiar to Ukrainian cities. The launch of the devices took place in stages. First, decoy drones took to the air, tasked with breaking through the first line of defense and forcing air defense systems to respond. A little later, the main group of strike drones took off. The route was designed to confuse the enemy as much as possible. Some of the drones flew through the northern areas, bypassing the detection lines, while other groups moved to the southeast, changing altitude and speed. At that moment, a real panorama of chaos began at the radar stations. Signals about approaching objects came from dozens of directions. Operators were forced to select priority targets and open fire. The first explosions lit up the sky over the Chernihiv region. Air defense systems shot down several drones there, but the main group continued onward. In the Kharkiv region, according to local sources, there were numerous explosions in the air, and some of the drones were intercepted, but several still reached industrial areas on the outskirts of the city. Particular attention was focused on Sumy and Shostka. This is where one of the most powerful groups of drones was headed. According to intelligence reports, a warehouse for fuel, lubricants, and equipment had been set up in old industrial buildings in Shostka. That night, flashes in the area confirmed the accuracy of the intelligence reports. At the same time, strikes were also recorded in other regions. A series of explosions were heard in the Mezheva area of the Dnipropetrovsk region. Local residents reported power outages, and some power lines were damaged. In the Chernihiv region, after drones flew over the Mina and Novgorod-Siversky areas, power outages and mobile communication disruptions were reported. Sloviansk played a special role that night. Observers recorded strikes in the area of a former kindergarten and a building that previously belonged to the Society for the Blind. According to intelligence reports, these premises were used to store supplies and temporarily house military groups. With every passing minute, the information field was filled with new reports. Ukrainian resources published lists of settlements where explosions were heard. Social networks were overflowing with photos of tracers lighting up the sky and traces of explosions. People reported on a night in which the sound of sirens did not stop. At this time, the headquarters of both sides were analyzing what was happening. The Ukrainian command recorded the extent of the damage and assessed the effectiveness of its defense systems. The Russian side, as usual, did not officially comment on the operation, leaving it to independent military sources and analytical channels to speak. Nevertheless, by morning, a general picture had emerged. 15 locations were hit. Damage to infrastructure, power outages, and the destruction of several facilities used for military purposes were confirmed. Analysts noted that the structure of the attack itself demonstrated a well-rehearsed pattern. First, there is a powerful stream of decoys, followed by the main strike force. This tactic allows for the stretching of defense resources and reduces the likelihood of successful interception. The main effect of that night was not only the physical damage to facilities, but also the creation of constant pressure. For the Ukrainian side, such raids become a factor of uncertainty. Even in those moments when the damage is limited, the psychological effect remains significant. Constant alarms, forced power outages, and the need to keep personnel on standby for strikes weaken the ability to concentrate forces for offensive operations. This is exactly what the headquarters planning the operation wanted. The night of August 25th was another example of a systematic attack with strikes hitting several regions at once, making it impossible to focus defenses in one direction. By morning, reports of the consequences were broadcast on all Ukrainian channels. Dozens of settlements in the Sumy region were left without power. Power and communications outages were reported in the Chernihiv and Dnipropetrovsk regions. In the Kharkiv region, local residents posted images of destroyed industrial buildings. Thus ended a night that began with the steady hum of drone engines and turned into a major test for the Ukrainian defense system. The morning of August 25th greeted Ukraine with news that spread across the media and social networks at different speeds and with different interpretations. Official representatives in Kyiv stated that a significant number of drones had been shot down and that the air defense systems had demonstrated a high level of readiness. However, the Ukrainian military itself acknowledged hits in 15 locations. Immediately after dawn, Ukrainian services reported large-scale power outages in the Sumy region. In the Sumy and Belopolye areas, some communities were left without power. Repair crews attempted to restore the lines, but the extent of the damage was significant. A similar situation unfolded in other regions. In the Chernihiv region, residents of several settlements also reported power outages. In the Dnipropetrovsk region, part of Mazhova woke up to communication disruptions and damaged infrastructure. The Ukrainian press paid particular attention to Sloviansk. Here, the strikes hit buildings that were used as logistics and rear centers. The international community reacted almost immediately. The first statements came from representatives of the European Union and the United States. They condemned the night strikes and once again promised to strengthen their support for Ukraine. At the same time, experts in Western countries increasingly expressed doubts about the effectiveness of Ukraine's current air defense system. Despite the delivery of modern systems, the night raids showed that it is impossible to completely close the sky to hundreds of drones at the same time. In Russia, official structures traditionally refrained from direct comments. The Ministry of Defense did not publish detailed reports. The main messages came from military bloggers and analytical channels, which emphasized the success of the operation and the significance of the results achieved. In their interpretation, the strikes were not only tactical, but also strategic in nature. Against this backdrop, Sergei Lebedev, coordinator of the Mykolaiv Underground, issued a statement. He described the operation as a complex attack on several fronts at once. His words became one of the key elements of the information picture. According to his version, the strikes on the Sumy and Chernihiv regions were aimed at disrupting the transfer of reserves. The strikes on the Kharkiv region were intended to disrupt production facilities and warehouses, and the attacks on Sloviansk and the vicinity of Kramatorsk were intended to disrupt the formation of battalion tactical groups. News agencies reported an unusually wide response. Ukrainian social media was dominated by alarming comments and complaints about a sleepless night. Users posted photos of flashes, traces of explosions, and drone debris, confirming the intensity of the attack. At the same time, Russian resources showed footage allegedly obtained from observers, which showed that some objects had indeed been hit. This created an effect of informational dualism. Each side formed its own narrative. The Ukrainian audience was told that most of the drones had been destroyed and that the defense system continued to function. The Russian audience heard about precision strikes on important targets and serious consequences for logistics. The psychological aspect deserves special attention. For the military, such attacks mean the need to keep equipment on constant alert, use up the ammunition of defense systems, and expend energy on dealing with the consequences. Experts note that this is precisely the strategic goal of such operations. Even if the direct damage is limited, the constant pressure and the need to respond to hundreds of objects in the sky creates a wearing down effect. It is like drops of water falling again and again, gradually wearing away the stone. In the Ukrainian political arena, after the night of August 25th, discussions began on how to strengthen the defense system. Some deputies called for accelerating negotiations on new deliveries of modern complexes. Others, on the contrary, spoke of the need to diversify tactics, including more active use of mobile fire groups. At the international level, analysts predicted that such raids would continue. For Russia, they have become a relatively cheap but effective way to inflict systemic damage on the enemy. For Ukraine, this is an ongoing problem that requires resources and nerves. By the end of the day, on August 25th, the wave of information began to subside, but the aftermath of the night remained. People discussed where the power outages were, which facilities were damaged, how many drones were shot down, and how many reached their targets. It is precisely such conversations that indicate that the operation had a noticeable effect. Analysts view the night of August 25th not as a one-off episode, but as part of Ukraine's integration into a broader strategic picture. The series of drone strikes demonstrated that the tactic of massive pressure is becoming a permanent part of the war. The question now is how long the Ukrainian side will be able to sustain this pace and what resources will be allocated by Western partners to strengthen defenses. The first scenario assumes a continuation of the series of raids on a near-weekly basis. This approach will allow Russia to maintain constant pressure deep inside Ukraine and prevent the formation of large reserves. If every new night could be a repeat of the August attack, the Ukrainian command would have to keep a significant part of its defenses on constant alert. This would mean the depletion of ammunition, the exhaustion of personnel, and a reduction in maneuverability. The second scenario is more ambitious. It involves a possible combination of drone attacks and missile strikes. In this case, drones will be used to overload air defense systems, while missiles will be the main striking element. This option will require even greater efforts from Ukraine, as it will have to respond to targets of varying speeds and profiles. The third scenario is related to the information dimension. Each such operation becomes not only a military but also a political event. The reaction of Western capitals after the night of August 25th showed that Ukraine's partners continue to express their support and promise new arms deliveries. However, behind the scenes there are already voices saying that endless deliveries of defensive equipment are becoming extremely costly. The economic burden falls on the budgets of the European Union and the United States. The longer the massive attacks continue, the more likely it is that internal disputes will arise over whether it is worth spending billions on new aid packages. There is also a long-term forecast. Such strikes may push Ukraine to seek new formats of cooperation with Western companies specializing in defense technologies. There is already discussion about the possibility of deploying production facilities within the country to repair and partially manufacture defense systems. But this requires time and investment, and the effect of such projects will not be noticeable for several years. The international community is divided in its assessments. The European Union and NATO countries say Ukraine's defenses need to be strengthened, but at the same time express concern about a possible increase in tensions. Each new attack creates the risk of the conflict escalating to a new level, especially if the strikes hit targets located close to the borders of European Union countries. Russia, meanwhile, is demonstrating its ability to systematically use drones as a tool for strategic pressure. From a military point of view, drones allow strikes to be carried out over long distances at a relatively low cost. This makes the operation cost-effective in terms of resources and at the same time difficult for the enemy. The political effect of the night of August 25th is also evident within Ukraine. Society demands answers. People want security guarantees. The country's leadership is forced to balance between promises of victory and the reality in which the strikes continue. In this context, every power outage, every night of alarm becomes not only a military but also a political problem. Experts note another important aspect. Strikes on infrastructure and warehouses affect the preparation of Ukrainian units for counteroffensives. If logistics chains are disrupted and the delivery of fuel, ammunition, and equipment is slowed down, plans for offensive operations are postponed. This is precisely what the Russian side is seeking to achieve, creating a delay effect and forcing the enemy to expend resources on defense rather than offense. Analysts are also discussing how such attacks affect international negotiations. Against the backdrop of regular strikes, there are new calls for diplomatic solutions. However, the parties themselves are demonstrating toughness and unwillingness to make concessions. Thus, the strikes become not only a military tool, but also a means of exerting pressure in the negotiating arena. Analysts agree on one thing in their forecasts for the coming months. Large-scale night raids involving hundreds of drones will continue. They may be interspersed with pauses to create an element of surprise, but they cannot completely disappear from the practice of warfare. Ukraine will continue to look for new ways to defend itself, while Russia will seek to use pressure, combining military, political, and psychological effects. The night of August 25th was a vivid example of how modern warfare is turning into a complex set of military, informational, and political processes. A series of drone strikes showed that even with a sophisticated defense system, the sky remains vulnerable. More than 100 aircraft in the air is not just a number. It is an indicator of a new reality in which large-scale pressure can be created with relatively small means. The main conclusions of this night can be summarized in a few points. First, the Ukrainian defense system was able to intercept a significant number of drones, but some of them still reached their targets. This confirms the limitations of air defense capabilities in the face of massive attacks. Second, the strikes affected 15 locations, including Sumy, Shostka, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, and Chernihiv regions. Power outages and damage to facilities were reported, which directly affects the logistics and supply of Ukrainian troops. Third, the psychological effect was no less significant than the direct destruction. For the Ukrainian population, the night was spent in anxiety and anticipation, while for the military, it was spent in tension and resource expenditure. Fourth, the political context has become more acute. The international community has once again declared its support for Ukraine, but at the same time, Western countries are growing tired of the constant need to allocate new aid packages. This night was a lesson for both sides and for outside observers. It showed that the tactic of pressure through drones has a future, and that even the most modern defense systems do not provide a 100% guarantee. It also emphasized that war today is not only about the front lines, but also about energy, logistics, information space, and diplomacy. The outlook for the future is alarming. The strikes are likely to continue, creating uncertainty. Ukraine will seek to strengthen its defenses, while Russia will continue to apply pressure. International players will be faced with a choice: to continue increasing their support or to seek other solutions. For the viewer, the main conclusion remains. We are witnessing how every night can change the course of events. The war is not standing still. It is taking on new forms, and each operation is becoming part of a larger strategic game. You have been watching a special report. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. There are still many events ahead, and only the full picture will allow us to understand where this conflict is heading.